Hello and welcome to Face to Face. Our guest today is Professor Michael Keefer. He's a professor of English at the University of Guelph. And we're going to be talking about an issue called Criticize Israel, Go to Jail. It's an issue of free speech, I guess. Oh, maybe you can just tell us, Michael, what are the issues involved here?
Well, Jack, it's a case of something that emerged like an overnight mushroom. In June of 2009, a parliamentary coalition, not a parliamentary committee, but a group of kind of spontaneously organized parliamentarians decided to get together and to hold a parliamentary inquiry. And they call themselves the Canadian Parliamentary Coalition to Combat Antisemitism, which of course sounds like a worthy cause, a good cause.
And it sounds like a very official group, the Canadian Parliamentary Commission.
Well, they are parliamentarians, of course.
Yes, they are parliamentarians.
There's the possibility of people confusing it, I suppose, with a parliamentary committee delegated in the normal way by a vote of parliament to look into something.
Which none of us know about. I mean, none of us know how our parliament works. Yeah, and right, I've never heard anything about this entire commission or committee, or very, very little about it, as I'm sure have most of you. So,
well, I think the reason that people kind of sat up last summer, at least I didn't hear about it initially when they first called for submissions to an inquiry, but a couple of months afterward, I through email networks, friends said, have you seen what's going on? And what was going on was a really inflammatory call for submissions by a group that appeared to have come to their conclusions before they'd begun to do research, or before they'd begun to conduct an inquiry even. So it seemed upside down.
Here we are in our parliament, a commission is formed.
Coalition.
A coalition is formed of parliamentarians from all parties?
Initially, they were all parties. As they began to move into their work, and they received, of course, submissions of all kinds from various people with various opinions on the subject, various kinds of expertise to contribute. The Bloc Québécois members of this coalition said, we would like to hear from this group, the Canadian Arab Federation, and this group, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, two, important groups. And the organizers, at least the people chairing the committee running that part of their work, said, no, we're not going to hear from them. And the Bloc Québécois members, I clearly said, this is pretty unbalanced. We're out of here. And they in fairly strong terms, denounced the work of the coalition as seriously unbalanced and indeed improper. If you're going to do an inquiry of that sort, you don't do it with what I would call a quite extremist ideological filter. And I think that's what was evident from, I think, early on.
So I'll ask all of you who are listening, do you remember hearing about this in the media when the Bloc Québécois dropped out of a parliamentary committee saying that the coalition saying that the coalition was biased, unfair, only hearing from one side on a very important issue, and yet nothing in the media. Why nothing in the media? Because they don't want us to know about what this coalition is doing. And I don't know what it is doing, so perhaps we can just focus right in on that.
Well, what was inflammatory about their initial statements is that they were declaring, again, before having done research or conducted an inquiry, that we have a really dangerous resurgence of anti-Semitism in this country, that it's at levels that are really unprecedented since the Second World War, that Jewish students are being persecuted, intimidated, and mocked in Canadian universities, that there's a problem with the media, and so on. Now, if that were true, of course, it would be cause for very serious concern on the part of all Canadians. And I think, decent people are rightly going to stand up against any resurgence of anti-Semitism and say, this must be looked into. We must see what we can do to educate people not to fall into this kind of stupid and vicious prejudice.
Or racism against any group in this country. I mean, it's something that we don't want and don't need.
Absolutely. So the statements they were emitting, that were putting out basically their conclusions before they'd begun to look at evidence.
And this is the Parliamentary Coalition is putting out these statements saying that there is this growing anti-Semitism.
What they received included a very significant number of submissions that were critical of that kind of stance, that were submissions by scholars with expertise in history and the history of the Jewish people and of Canadian history, sociology, and so on. People who were saying, well, we applaud the idea of an investigation of issues of racism, but we're puzzled by the kinds of statements you're making, inflammatory statements, and we're puzzled by what seems pretty clear evidence of imbalance.
Okay, but where are they trying to go? Because that's probably the important issue. What is this coalition?
I think, yes, you are
coalition?
Right. Coalition.
Trying to get us to?
What they're trying to do, and it seems bizarre on the face of it, what they're trying to do is to expand the notion of anti-Semitism to incorporate criticism of actions of a state, actions in this case of the State of Israel, such that if you stand up on ethical grounds and on grounds of a commitment to the universal principles of human rights and the Geneva Conventions and so on, and say, this action, let's say the attack on Gaza in December 2008, January 2009, has involved massive violations of international law. You will be accused by people who hold this sort of view of not having a genuine interest in international law and ethics and human solidarity,
and making a typical political statement,
but of expressing in displaced form a vicious anti-Semitic prejudice. Now, you can see what's involved here. You extend what they're saying is the anti-Semitism traditionally wanted to stop Jews from participating as full citizens. The new anti-Semitism, they say, is a displacement of this hatred such that people are now directing it against the State of Israel, which is asserted in this case to be the embodiment of a sort of collective will of the Jewish people, with the aim of preventing that state from participating in the family of nations. So the claim then is that in a kind of hypocritical and sophisticated way, so-called exponents of international law and human solidarity are really just vicious anti-Semites who want to attack the Jews in any way possible. Now,
let me just say that is absolutely insane, because what it means is you cannot speak in political terms about a nation state. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've always had that right to do that about including our own country. Basically, we can say what we want about countries, but now we can't say it about Israel. Is that where this coalition, this parliamentary coalition, is trying to take us?
By the way, I would say, our first duty is, of course, to criticize our own country, the things that our government is leading us into in Haiti or Afghanistan or elsewhere, and to say, no, we don't accept this. Or indeed to the things that our government is doing in complicity with the government of Israel in supporting, for example, the blockade of Gaza. I mean, Canada has been a very full participant in these policies. We've given strong economic and diplomatic support to actions that I think on a level of just decent treatment of human beings are intolerable. And of course, they're also violations of international law and violations of the Geneva Conventions and so on. I mean, it does seem. I mean, when you look at it in these terms, it seems bizarre, doesn't it? That
a law is this coalition trying to bring a law into place that makes it illegal to criticize Israel? Because that's kind of the title of the of this talks you're giving across Canada. And I'll just hold this up again. Mm-hmm. Which is criticize Israel, go to jail. Because if we can't criticize Israel, the next step is to remove our ability to criticize our own government, no doubt, which is already being removed, as we saw recently in Toronto with the G8 and G20 meetings. Hundreds of innocent people arrested.
Exactly. I would say there's a question mark at the end of the title. It's not the kind of Monopoly game command, go to jail, don't stop, don't pass go. I think that is a serious threat in the sense that it's actually happening right now in France. Human rights activists who have advocated as a peaceful solution to, or a peaceful way of exerting pressure on the State of Israel to come to a recognition of its obligations under international law, who in other words have been advocating economic pressures on Israel, have been brought before courts accused of hate crimes. Handing out pamphlets in a supermarket saying we support a policy of measured and calibrated boycott
of Israel.
Disinvestment and sanctions.
Yeah, because really there's a worldwide campaign.
There's a worldwide campaign.
A boycott of Israel, similar...
Boycott, divestment, sanctions.
Similar to what was done against the apartheid regime in South Africa some decades ago.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to emphasize in my contributions to this book, and I should say I'm sorry, we haven't mentioned the book yet, but we will. The book that I am part author and compiler of. One thing I wanted to mention and to foreground is that I don't in any way see this as a question of saying I am opposed to the State of Israel, I am opposed to Israel, or that I don't think people should take that position. I think we should take the position of being opposed to actions taken by, and a whole structure of actions taken by a state. I quote the words of the great English poet William Blake, one of his proverbs, opposition is true friendship. In other words, Canada and Israel have had a long history of amicable relations, and there's absolutely no reason why that should not continue. But you don't allow your friends to do noxious things, evil things.
Yeah, which is what I mean. Israel is doing that. Israel is. I mean, they used to be. We thought, the good guys. But 40 years later, Israel is. There cannot be peace, and it's not the people of Israel. It's the government of Israel.
Yes.
Supported by the United States.
And of course, receiving support
from Canada.
Very strong support from Canada.
Yeah, so no, I mean, we've got to be completely free to criticize the State of Israel as we're completely free to criticize the actions of our own government or the actions of any other nation. And we cannot allow that to be taken from us, which is that what this committee, because I've never heard anything about it. I don't know what they're doing.
I didn't answer your previous question adequately, Jack. You said, is this leading toward the possibility of kind of it might be changes in the law. That is a possibility. I don't think it's a strong likelihood. I mean, this parliamentary coalition is reporting to the government, and they anticipate a very quick response, by the way. One reason for that being, of course, that a senior member of the Harper government, Jason Kenney, is one of the leading figures behind this coalition.
Can you mention a few other people who are on it?
Well, I'd say the two kind of guiding lights, if you like, or misguiding lights, are Jason Kenney, Minister of Citizenship, Immigration, and Multiculturalism, and Professor Irwin Cotler, Member of Parliament, former Minister of Justice in the Liberal government, and a Professor of Law with, by the way, a very distinguished record as an international spokesman and activist for human rights, which makes it all the more strange that he seems not to want to recognize or to extend those rights to Palestinians.
What is happening with, I interrupted, you were saying where this coalition was going.
Well, they're going toward publishing their report. They were going to publish their report this spring, and I believe it may in part be because of no doubt they've received internal criticism. Perhaps there are arguments going on behind closed doors, but quite certainly they've received very strong public criticism from journalists like Murray Dobbin, from the people whose work is collected in the book that I've published. And they're now going to present their report in early November. And they want this to coincide with a large and it will no doubt be amply publicized conference in Ottawa of a group calling itself the Interparliamentary Coalition to Combat Antisemitism, ICCA. So the ICCA is being hosted by the CPCCA, and the organizer in both cases is Professor Erwin Kotler. The ICCA is something he's been working on for about 8 years, and it had its first meeting in London last year, and the Canadian parliamentarians who went there came back saying, let's form the CPCCA. Which
again, can you give us the name of?
Canadian Parliamentary Coalition to Combat Antisemitism. All these initials are.
I find it amazing that this is going on, and we, the people of Canada, don't know anything about it. I mean, I'm concerned because I think it could be important, because the stuff we don't hear about is exactly what is important. What they do tell us about is, usually or very often to make us look somewhere else, while the important things are going on behind the scenes.
But in terms of their intention, it could perhaps involve recommendations for tinkering with the criminal code. I think more likely what they want to do is to alter the way in which legislators, the judiciary, the police, the media, and the public look on this issue. If they can effectively persuade us that there is a problem of monstrous proportions that we need to unite immediately to act against, and that this problem expresses itself through anti-Semites
like me criticizing
Israel.
Yeah.
Then they've achieved what they want. They don't necessarily need to. I mean, what's happening in France when activists are hauled before courts for peacefully advocating peaceful actions to influence the behavior of a foreign state, looks to me a lot like a perversion of French hate crimes law.
And a perversion of justice.
And I think they may be looking to achieve something like that through simply the way our laws are applied, or perhaps simply they may be counting on a kind of intimidation factor. If people are persuaded that to speak in certain ways of a state actually does amount to hate crime, then universities, let's say, will not want to have students organizing student events or academics or organizing conferences in which this language is circulated. The media will be hesitant. You see, there's a potential for a kind of widespread.
Can you say again what's happening in France? So you're saying that in France today, and I mean, to me, France is a very progressive country, ahead of us in many, many ways, part of the European Union.
Yeah, and France, there was a Pew Research study, comparative surveys of 17 countries, in which they asked people to comment on their attitudes toward Jews. And the country that came out with the highest percentage of people expressing a favorable opinion of Jews was France. The U.S. was a couple of percentage points behind. The United Kingdom, 6% behind. Canada wasn't included, but I'm sure we would have been somewhere in that list.
So if we were living in France today, and for example, this recent issue or incident with the flotilla steaming towards Gaza that was attacked on the high seas by Israeli troops, or the attacks on Gaza, which kill many, many, many innocent people by the Israeli government. So if we were in France and we're handing out documents or leaflets on the street about this, then we could be arrested?
Well, potentially. I mean, since a woman in Bordeaux in southern France was hauled before a court, sentenced and convicted and sentenced to a fine of 1,000 euros for the crime of putting a sticker on a fruit juice container, a sticker advocating a boycott of Israel. Now, perhaps that's an annoyance to the owner of the store. Perhaps that's legitimately to be understood as costing the store something. But a 1,000 euro fine and effectively a conviction for hate crime
So she wasn't charged with damaging the store's property.
I don't think so. No, I think it was under the hate crime legislation, and the current action against 5 activists in northern France is for handing out leaflets in a supermarket.
And again, is that because of the supermarket is a private place, or under this hate crimes legislation?
No, they're before the court on, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's
we shouldn't even call it hate crimes. I mean, this is crazy when you cannot criticize a nation state like the United States. And I assume that once it's done for one country, it'll spread so that we can't say anything bad about our good friends, the United States, or our own government. Is this... we've got a list of questions here that we're kind of running through. So the next question is kind of, do you think this is a threat to free speech in Canada? We've kind of talked about that.
Yeah, I think we have. It's perhaps most of all through the, not so much the likelihood of things comparable to those happening in France, although that could well happen. But my sense is that it would be more something kind of operating through institutions, through the school system. The teachers, for example, who wanted to incorporate certain kinds of things into the high school curriculum would find themselves seriously penalized. I mean, they already do, but even more seriously penalized. And at
universities, I guess.
Universities could become places where, free speech is clamped down on.
And again, that's already happened, no doubt.
That has happened, and there's been some very foolish behavior, I think, by some university administrators, and by some others, I should say, some very decent behavior.
Why do you think the Conservatives are pushing this particular agenda?
Well, Harun Siddiqui of the Toronto Star identified Jason Kenney as the minister in the Harper cabinet responsible for setting Canadians against one another for Tory electoral advantage.
Can you say that again?
That's a bit of a mouthful. I may be. He probably put it more elegantly. Yeah. The minister responsible for setting Canadians against each other for Tory party electoral advantage.
And we see a lot of that. I mean, the 2 issues that are in the news today, as this is being filmed, in September 24th approximately. Are the long gun registry, in which they pit, they say city dwellers against the rural communities, sort of, or people who believe, and now the census. That's the other issue that's in the news today. And the media is masterful at pitting us against one another, while the same politicians who are owned by the same corporations who own the media. Largely in secret, to run an economic and political agenda that the rest of us don't know anything about, as we don't know anything about this.
Yeah, it's a politics of, I mean, perhaps this is a silly way of putting it, but of divide and rule. If you have people at each other's throats, you're raising the kind of level of back and forth, snarling, and diverting people from real issues. And I think that could be part of it. I should say, though, that it's not just the Conservative Party. I mean, Professor Kotler is, of course, a senior figure in the Federal Liberal Party, former Justice Minister.
Oh, okay. So it's...
And rather to the surprise, I think, of many supporters of the New Democratic Party, they have not withdrawn support from this coalition. The Bloc Québécois did. They said, we want to hear certain things, and when the coalition said, oh, no, we won't allow those people to speak to us, the Bloc said, oh, we're out of here. The NDP, rather to my surprise, and I would say my serious disappointment, didn't take that action. And I think many supporters of the NDP are asking their MPs, what's going on here? Why are you involved in this?
And of course, many more supporters of the NDP don't know anything about it.
Of course, yeah.
Because it is really totally, I mean, to me, under the radar completely. Well,
we're trying to bring it up into visibility. And can I tell you how?
Please do.
Well, I'm involved with a small new alternative media website. It's a news commentary website called the Canadian Charger. I've been a member of its editorial board. I was helping in getting it up and running. We've been online for a little over a year. And what we're trying to do is to, I think much the same as what you're trying to do, to broaden the spectrum of available opinion and discourse and reporting and analysis. We began to receive from people who'd sent in submissions to this parliamentary inquiry requests that we publish their texts on the website, which of course we were glad to do. I myself had a submission to the CPCCA, which I decided not to publish. I thought I could do better with a subsequent effort. But by the time we'd published about half a dozen of these, and very interesting texts by prominent people, and by human rights organizations of real stature, we thought perhaps we should put together a booklet, because what's obviously going to happen is a kind of censorship. There's no way that this coalition is going to listen to and give any further space to. It has never published, for example, the submissions it received, and it excluded from its oral hearings anything that was critical of the agenda it announced to begin with. So we said, let's make a booklet. Let's send copies to every member of Parliament and every member of the Senate, and to journalists across the country and to activist groups. And so we began to put this together. I said I'll take on the job of editing it. And it became apparent to me that what was needed was not just the texts themselves, valuable and fine though those texts are, but we needed to have some context, because Canadians, I wouldn't want to approach the issue of anti-Semitism in this country without reminding people that there's a history in this country, and a shameful history of anti-Semitism. Canada during the 1930s, the English-speaking countries during the 1930s, when Jewish refugees from Nazism were trying desperately to escape, were not hospitable, to put it mildly, to the plight of those refugees. And Canada was probably the worst. On a per capita basis, I mean, we don't know this, do we?
No, we don't.
Part of what we don't know.
Thanks to our school system and the media. Thank you for never telling us these things.
Part of what I recommended to the in my little submission was that this was part of our history that needed to be part of an anti-racist curriculum, so that people would know this. Well, here's the most salient fact. On a per capita basis, Canada accepted 1/5 as many Jewish refugees from Nazism as did Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom. 1/5 as many. Now, we think of ourselves as a kind of country of decent people. That's shameful. That's deeply shameful. And of course, the attitudes that impelled that kind of appalling behavior continued. I mean, there was institutionalized anti-Semitism in this country until the early 1960s.
And racism against many other groups of people as well.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I would distinguish between racism that takes a form of people having vile opinions and contempt or hatred, and the actual expression of those vile opinions in institutionalized form. So when Islamophobia is horrible, but when agents of the Canadian state connive in the arrest and torture of Meher Arar, that is a quantum leap beyond simply sneering and being nasty to people. Although sneering and being nasty is something we need to teach people. There's a huge reservoir of decency in this country, and people don't accept the kind of stuff that was, casually acceptable decades ago. I mean, if someone who openly voices an anti-Semitic slur in most settings in this country will automatically be regarded with contempt.
Or anti-Chinese, anti-Japanese, anti-Christian,
Exactly.
Many anti-Muslim, And you know what? To me, that's a great thing about this country. But there are people who are trying to destroy that.
There are indeed. And one of the things to be said about Jason Kenney, for example, is that as Minister of Immigration, and Minister responsible for immigration, he has done a great deal to damage the Immigration Review Board, for example, by not reappointing people, by letting out. This is kind of standard behavior. Invent a crisis, inventing a crisis by underfunding the system, so there's a pileup of refugees who aren't getting their cases looked at, and then saying, oh my God, look at all these horrible people pretending they're refugees trying to get into our country, and so on. I mean, that disgusting behavior in relation to the Tamil refugees.
I mean, I don't even see why it was that big an issue. There's 600 people a day come to Canada as immigrants.
Yeah.
You know, here was a boat of 500 people coming, you know, once in 2 years. Canada takes, I know there's other countries, especially in the Middle East, who are overloaded with refugees because they're being forced out of country. Look what's happening in Africa, in so many places, and those people are going somewhere. Yeah. Here we get one boat and it's treated as if it's the end of the world. We can't deal with it.
My first ancestor bearing my father's family name, my family name in this country, was a refugee, a widowed refugee, whose husband had been killed in a war, the American Revolution, in fact. Lots of us are refugees.
Terrorist Americans fighting against our good British boys.
They took the family farm and kept it. Yeah.
What we're talking about, we're talking with Professor Michael Keefer. We're talking about a parliamentary coalition, a group of parliamentarians who are working on an issue of, I still don't know exactly what it is, but on this coalition, the Bloc Québécois pulled off of it because they didn't like the fact that the coalition, which is discussing racism and a response to it. Although they're really not discussing racism. I think racism is the excuse. This is an important political issue that says we will not, possibly will not be able to criticize nation states. Yeah. But the Bloc pulled off, and maybe you can just explain why they refused to remain on the coalition.
Well, it was in particular because, at least according to the press reports, because there were two submissions in particular they looked at and said, oh, this is interesting. I want to hear from these people at greater length.
So two submissions were made to this coalition.
Yes.
This parliamentary coalition.
Well, no, I mean, many submissions were made.
Submissions.
They received probably well over 150. And of those, I know of at least 40 that were critical, like the ones that we published in this book. And actually, the two that figured in the news reports are both published in the book that we have published. Perhaps we can talk about that in a minute. But the Canadian Arab Federation and Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East.
So the Canadian Arab Federation and Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East wanted to speak to this coalition. Yes, and the Bloc wanted to hear more from them.
That's right. And it does sound rather extraordinary, doesn't it, for a purportedly all-party coalition to tell one of the groups that's joined this coalition, basically, shut up. We're not going to listen to you.
So they told the Bloc to shut up.
Well, they told the Bloc, no, we're not going to have these people. You don't have any input into what we decide to hear. Was the clear message.
Now remember, folks, we heard nothing about this in the media. To me, it's not shocking anymore because that's the way things operate in this country, how they just don't, they choose what they want us to hear about.
Well, I think it was reported, but probably kind of under the radar, sort of page 17 news, that sort of.
I guarantee it was under the radar for 98% of Canadians because I'm interested in stuff like this and I don't really, hear, the Bloc dropping off.
Yeah. Of course, there's no love lost on the part of the Conservatives for the Bloc Québécois. They make a habit of sneering at them, and no doubt did so in this case as well.
A lot of people I know wish the Bloc was here because we like their social policies. I want Quebec to stay in Canada, but when I hear the leader or the politicians from the Bloc talking about social issues, I like where they're coming from.
I do too. I find that, and I've met some Bloc MPs and been very impressed by the quality of their understanding of key issues.
Once again, there is a parliamentary coalition in existence that's discussing possibly bringing in or making some changes that make it difficult or illegal to criticize, of all people, the State of Israel. So what can people, both individuals and groups, do about all of this?
Well, I think we can inform ourselves. What we decided to do was to publish this book, in which we give a collection of the texts which were effectively suppressed by the CPCCA, together with an analysis of a summary of the history of Canadian anti-Semitism, together with a detailed account of, as best the statistics allow us to understand it, what the actuality is. In other words, evidence, I think it's clear evidence, that claims of a horrendous resurgence of anti-Semitism are quite simply false. And together with, as well, an analysis of the kind of rhetorical shell game that's going on when people attempt to expand the notion of anti-Semitism to incorporate criticism of the state. Now, I think people can also link up with activist groups, human rights groups, that have been working on this and related issues of attempts to suppress free speech. One of the really important groups in this country is the committee, they're represented in the book here, the Seriously Free Speech Committee, who I should say have done a wonderful job of organizing a speaking tour for me. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for their kindness, their activism, their determination to make sure that a serious threat to free speech in this country like this doesn't go by under the radar, isn't something that Canadians don't know about, but becomes something that we can actively think about and critically debate and come to understand. And there are other groups that are engaged in the same endeavor, Independent Jewish Voices, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and others. Now, I think that's one kind of action people can take. I think people can contact their MPs, particularly if they're in a riding represented by a New Democratic Party MP, and say, "Why are you part of this? You know, how does this relate to the stated goals of this party, and how does this relate to the principles on which we voted for you?"
Is it possible that the NDP is staying on this committee in order to try to make it the best it can be, to just completely change the direction it's going on, or that's not what's happening?
I think that's a claim that's been made, but frankly, I'm skeptical of it. It seems to me that when you have two people who are as firmly persuaded of the rightness of this conflation of anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel, as are Minister Jason Kenney and Professor Irwin Cotler, you're not going to change their opinions. I mean, it was quite clear they'd written, at least in outline form, they'd written their report before they began to hear submissions.
Yeah.
So they're not going to change. They're not going to change their view because there's one or a couple of NDP members who are timidly raising their hands and saying, "Doesn't this seem a little bit?"
So, what is their final report going to say?
Well, one of the contributors to this book, Antisemitism, Real and Imagined, suggested that we know what they're going to say because they said it in their first call for papers.
And what did they say in their first call for papers?
Oh, well, they said all this stuff about a resurgence of anti-Semitism that should terrify us, the systematic persecution of Jewish students in Canadian universities.
But none of that is happening. So what this is really all about is telling us that we cannot criticize Israel.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. You know, there are occasional episodes where students on university campuses get too excited and are rude to each other. Right? That's basically. I mean, in fact, it's much more likely that students who are critical of Israel on university campuses are going to get punished by university administrations than students who are supportive of Israel.
I really am very concerned that conservative and liberal parliamentarians are essentially creating a situation where people cannot criticize Israel and calling that anti-Semitism. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous.
It is wrong, and as I'd like to reiterate, it is. I think it's a major misconception. I mean, to think that it is good for Israel to receive unthinking support from from Canadians in general, or from the Canadian Jewish community in particular. It's good for Israel to be told by opposition is true friendship. It's, as the poet William Blake says, it's good for Israel to be told, no, stop this. No, this is going to damage, apart from anything it does to free speech in Canada, it's going to damage the possibilities for continued democracy in Israel. They're reaching a point where they have to choose. Either they retreat from the occupied territories, or they become a state that is no longer, even in name, democratic.
Okay, maybe you can, I mean, you already have told us a fair bit about the book, but maybe you can just go over it again and why you wrote it, or why you were part of putting it together.
Yes, as I want to emphasize, I'm the part author and compiler of the book, and it's in 3 parts. The first part contains some extraordinary statements, fine, analytically strong, and moving and ethical, by 11 scholars and human rights activists. The second part consists of statements by 7 human rights organizations, some of whom we've named already. They include the Seriously Free Speech Committee, Canadian Arab Federation, and others, Independent Jewish Voices. And the third part consists of chapters in which I provide a context, historical context, as best one can with the available statistics, a factual context. In other words, here's a claim of a resurgence of anti-Semitism. If it were really happening, of course we would have to act against it. Is it happening? What evidence is there from Stats Canada, from Canadian police forces, from other sources? So I've done an analysis of that. And then finally an analysis of this rhetorical shell game that the CPCCA and people who talk about a new anti-Semitism, meaning by that their extension of the term to cover criticism of Israel, are involved in. I mean, it's just some rhetorical trickery there that.
And it's a very vicious rhetorical trickery.
It is, because
this is dangerous stuff these people are doing.
It is indeed, yes. This is part of the work that is being done by the people the activists who are hosting my speaking tour, and who are, I think, in many ways, have been taking a stand against attacks on free speech. I mean, attacks on free speech by what used to be CanWest Global, right, which engaged in a well-publicized, I hope, strategic lawsuit against public participation, against the people who produced that brilliant parody of the Vancouver Sun, against Shaw Media for their censorship of interviews with Israelis, with South Africans, with other people voicing critical opinions of Israel and Canada's unthinking support for.
That's right. Canada is one of the great supporters of Israel in the world. Now, I just want to say again that the title of this one pager is "Criticize Israel, Go to Jail." There is a question mark after it, so it doesn't mean you're going to be going to jail, but we have to be careful of where we allow this little committee to go. I think we should be contacting our media and saying, this sounds like it could be potentially an important issue. What are these crazy people in Ottawa doing? Why aren't you telling us anything about it? Where's the leadership from the media? And
we're starting to hear from the media. Jean-François Lépine in Radio-Canada in Quebec did a radio report back in April in which he mentioned some of this. Gerald Kaplan wrote for the Globe and Mail an interesting piece, and one that I have to say with some pleasure said flattering things about the book. Murray Dobbin has written excellent pieces published in the Tyee and elsewhere. So I think there's the beginnings of what I hope will become something like a real surge of critical attention.
Thank you very much for watching Face to Face. We've been talking to Professor Michael Keefer, Professor of English from the University of Guelph, talking about a very important issue. Keep your eye on it, folks. And, let's see if we can find out what's going on. This has been a very interesting talk. Thank you very much for watching Face to Face.